They are the answer to prayers that should never have been spoken. In the endless dark of the 41st millennium, there are few names whispered with both reverence and terror. The Grey Knights are one, born not from flesh, but from sacrifice, not from ambition, but from prophecy. They are said to be pure, untainted by the warp, immune to the corruption that has devoured entire civilizations. Yet, to see them, to even know of them, is to be marked by death. Because purity in the Imperium is not mercy. It is the most efficient form of eradication. Somewhere beyond the light of dying stars, on a moon that exists in no chart, they gather. Titans in silver, engraved with runes that hum like the heartbeat of an ancient god. They walk among relics of 1,000 forgotten crusades, their armor polished not for vanity, but for ritual. Each plate a prayer, each seal a promise. That, should the demon ever breach reality, these knights will not just fight, they will erase. And erase they do. Imagine a battlefield suffocating under psychic storm, where time folds in on itself, and screams turn into echoes that never end. A planet once green, now turned to ash and bone. At the center, a single figure kneels, a man, weeping, holding the charred remains of his child. Above him, the sky cracks open, a wound bleeding light and madness. From that wound, shapes crawl, twisting, laughing, made of every nightmare humanity has ever denied. Then, silence. A flash of argent light descends from orbit. The air itself bends in prayer. When the storm fades, the monsters are gone. So are the man, the city, the world. Only scorched soil remains, sterile, sanctified, silent. The Grey Knights had come. To most within the Imperium they are a myth. To the Inquisition, they are the last confession. Their existence is a secret buried under layers of forbidden scripture. Even among the Space Marines, their name carries weight unspoken. It is said that to fight alongside a Grey Knight is to witness the impossible, to see faith manifest as weapon. To fight against one, however, is to die unremembered. For they do not wage war as men do. They wage it as an act of exorcism. Each warrior of Titan, their fortress monastery orbiting Saturn, was forged through agony. They were not chosen, but purified, their very souls rewritten by ritual. Every trace of doubt burned away by psychic fire. They are humanity's final shield against the demonic, and humanity's executioners when that shield cracks. No one survives their arrival unscarred. Entire regiments of the Imperial Guard have been purged after witnessing them in battle. Entire planets have been cleansed when the line between reality and the warp grew thin. Their logic is not cruelty, it is necessity. For if even one mind carries a whisper of the abyss, that whisper becomes a scream. And screams in this galaxy draw attention, so they destroy everything. Every witness, every survivor. They call it purification. The rest of us would call it horror. Yet, to watch them fight is to witness something divine. They move with unnatural unity, psychic minds intertwined like strands of silver. When one strikes, a dozen others echo the motion, each blow guided by will alone. Bolter fire sings in unison, each round engraved with the Emperor's name. Demons howl and wither, their forms unraveling as sanctified blades pierce their unreal flesh. But listen closely, and beneath that holy carnage, there is another sound, a low, resonant hum, the chant of 1,000 voices inside one body, the echo of souls reforged. The Grey Knights do not pray for victory, they pray for containment, because they know that victory in this age is an illusion. Every battle is a delay, every triumph a wound that festers unseen. The warp cannot be conquered, only resisted. And so they resist, endlessly, mercilessly, at any cost. There are no heroes here, only survivors who live long enough to be erased. On Titan, within their sanctum, they kneel before the relics of Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most secret servant. It was he who founded them in the shadows of the Horus Heresy, when half the galaxy burned in betrayal. From the ashes of that civil war, he gathered those untouched by the corruption that had swallowed even gods. He forged 8 chosen men, the first of their kind. From them, a brotherhood born of silence, of purity, of pain. They were the Emperor's last whisper before his silence, and even now, 10,000 years later, they obey that whisper. There are stories, quiet ones, told by those who do not live long enough to confirm them, of Grey Knights standing alone on worlds consumed by the warp, fighting until time itself fractures. Of one knight, torn apart by demons, his armor shattered, yet his voice reciting scripture through blood and broken metal. When his body fell, the words continued, echoing through the battlefield until dawn, when the planet ceased to exist. The Inquisition calls such stories necessary fabrications. But those who have seen their light know better. You wouldn't survive them. Not because they would hunt you, though they might, but because to witness their truth is to unmake the fragile lie that keeps mankind sane. To look upon a Grey Knight is to see what the Imperium truly is, a machine of faith, consuming itself to keep the stars from screaming. And you, your thoughts, your doubts, your memories, are contamination. You are the crack through which the demon whispers. The Grey Knights are not men. They are the Emperor's immune system, erasing infection wherever it hides. They do not judge, they do not pity, they simply cleanse. Their wars are fought not for glory, but to ensure that the galaxy forgets what they've seen. Every time they deploy, a world disappears from the records. Entire histories erased, rewritten as acts of God or warp anomaly. Because if the Imperium ever learned what truly lurks in the void, faith itself would collapse. And so they erase the witnesses, they erase the truth, and they erase you. There is a paradox in their existence, one they cannot speak of. To be utterly pure in a universe built on sin is to be utterly alone. Beneath their silver armor, they do not know laughter or memory or peace. They dream not of victory, but of silence. For the demons they fight are not always monsters of the warp. Sometimes they are the voices inside their own minds, the doubt that whispers, "What if purity is just another form of corruption?" But even that thought is treason, and so they purge it, again and again and again. Some scholars, those who have not yet been silenced, claim the Grey Knights have never fallen to chaos, that not one of their number has turned against the Emperor. But if that is true, then the question becomes more haunting. What price have they paid to remain pure? What part of their humanity was sacrificed to make them incorruptible? Because purity, in the end, is not a virtue. It is the absence of self. And the Grey Knights have long since ceased to be themselves. Still, they endure. For 10,000 years they have fought wars no one remembers, saved worlds that no longer exist, and burned the names of heroes before history could write them. The galaxy forgets. They remain, silent, relentless, unseen. Sometimes, late in the watch, when the void hums and the warp winds whisper, a faint sound can be heard from Titan's orbit, a chant, ancient, sorrowful, and resolute. It is said the knights pray not to the Emperor, but for him, that he may never see what they've become in his name. And somewhere in the dark a demon laughs, softly, knowingly, because even purity leaves a shadow. Perhaps that is why, in recent times, whispers speak of a fracture, a battle too great, a rift too wide, a secret mission where an entire brotherhood vanished into the warp and returned, changed. They fight with greater ferocity now, but there is something missing behind their eyes, something absent. The Inquisition denies it, of course. Records have been sealed, planets erased, but fragments remain. Reports of silver warriors whose presence drives mortals insane, soldiers who bleed light instead of blood, priests who claim to have seen a reflection in a knight's armor that was not their own. Whatever they are, whatever they've become, one truth endures. When the Grey Knights arrive, it is already too late. They are the Emperor's final word, unforgiving, unremembered, unstoppable. And somewhere beneath the ashes of a world that never was, something moves, something that should not have survived their cleansing, something that whispers their true name. The Knights have returned to Titan, but not all of them came back alone. What returns from the warp is never what entered it. The words were carved into the chapel wall of the strike cruiser Sanctity of Purpose, etched by hands that had long since forgotten what trembling felt like. The Grey Knights did not speak of their losses, there was no such word in their liturgy. But the silence aboard the vessel was different now. It was aware. The air hummed faintly like the dying echo of a scream trapped between seconds. Brother Captain Ephrial knelt before the relic shrine, his armor darkened by the shadow of candles burning blue with psychic flame. He had led the Seventh Brotherhood into the abyss, and had brought only half of them back. His gauntleted hand rested on a tome bound in skin older than the Imperium itself. He dared not open it again. It whispered when left alone. Above him, the choir of astropaths murmured their endless psalms, their blind eyes bleeding faint tears of silver. The warp had touched them deeply this time. Some sang in voices not their own. Some had stopped altogether, staring into nothing, lips frozen in mid-prayer. None of it surprised Ephrial. Purity was a blade honed against suffering, and suffering had been his only companion since Titan. In the command sanctum, Inquisitor Valen watched from the shadows. She was Ordo Malleus, the hammer of the demon, and yet even she flinched when she looked upon the knights. There was something off about them. Not tainted, but hollow. Their psychic resonance had changed. Where once there was a radiant unity, now there was an echo, as if their collective soul were missing a note. She had ordered purity tests, soul scryings, and exorcisms. All returned clear. All too clear. "Captain Ephrial," she said softly, stepping forward, her voice thin against the weight of the ship's chapel. "The Emperor's tarot yields strange visions. I saw Titan burning, a silver flame consuming itself. Tell me, what did you bring back?" Ephrial's helm turned slightly. The blue of his eyes glowed behind the lenses, unreadable. "We brought back victory, Inquisitor. The demon is gone." "And the world?" she asked. He did not answer. Elsewhere, in the barracks-turned sanctuary, the surviving knights sat in silent formation. Their armor bore fresh purity seals, their blades wrapped in prayer scrolls that fluttered like dying moths. But none spoke. Only Brother Arcton moved, his hands methodically cleaning his stormbolter as though the ritual could erase what he had seen beyond the veil. He could still feel it, the warmth of the warp's breath on his mind, whispering his name. When the chaplain entered, all rose. His crozius, shaped like a burning sigil, throbbed faintly with psychic light. He looked upon his brothers not as warriors, but as souls on the brink. "You have returned from the void," he began, voice resonant and terrible. "You have stood in the presence of the unholy and remained whole. Yet wholeness is not purity. The warp infects through memory, through doubt, through silence." Arcton's gauntlet tightened around the weapon. Silence. That word again. It followed them now like a second shadow. On the bridge, the navigator's third eye bled as she traced their path toward Titan. Warp space writhed in their wake, as if reluctant to release them. The Emperor's light flickered, distorted, bending into symbols she dared not name. She saw visions. Monuments of silver crumbling beneath a red storm. Runes burning themselves into existence on Titan's surface. And beneath the fortress monastery, something vast and chained stirring for the first time in millennia. When she gasped, the command servitors did not react. They were deaf to the screams of the Immaterium. She wasn't. In the Librarium of Titan, Grand Master Kaldor Drago stood before the Chamber of Blades. Each sword within hummed with history, centuries of demon blood, sanctified by sacrifice. Yet one place was empty. The blade of Ephriel's predecessor, lost on the world of Gethsemane, where the warp had swallowed the sky. That sword had never returned. Now, as he gazed upon the empty rack, Drago felt the faintest tremor of psychic disturbance. A name whispered in his mind, his own, and then, fainter still, another voice weeping in the dark. He turned to the seer priests behind him. "Begin the rites of binding. The seventh has returned. Prepare the vaults." The priests obeyed without question. None noticed that the flame in the reliquary had begun to burn blue. When the sanctity of purpose reached Titan, its transmission code did not match any known pattern. The automated defense silos locked onto it instantly, but held their fire upon Drago's command. He felt a dread he could not name. The knights aboard that ship had fought under his banner for centuries. Yet, when the boarding seals hissed open and the silver-clad warriors stepped onto the landing dais, every servitor, every scribe, every mortal soul in the hall fell to their knees, not in awe, but in primal fear. There was something missing behind the eyes of the warriors. Their armor gleamed brighter than ever, but the purity sigils along their shoulders flickered like dying stars. Drago approached, his voice steady. "Brothers, you have returned." Ephriel removed his helm. His face was pale, his gaze distant, as though looking through Drago rather than at him. "We have, my lord." But something followed. Within the deepest vaults of Titan, the Inquisition convened. Valen stood among them, 5 lords of the Ordo Malleus, each veiled in psychic wards strong enough to shatter mortal minds. The air pulsed with suppressed power. They had studied the seventh for days, dissecting records, scanning armor, probing psyches. Nothing, no trace of corruption, no demon signature, but the psychic silence was itself unnatural. It wasn't absence. It was suppression. One of the lords, an ancient man whose body was more machine than flesh, spoke at last. "Perhaps the corruption is not within them, but what they've brought with them." Valen's jaw tightened. "You mean the relic?" "Yes, the tome." All eyes turned to her. She had confiscated it herself, an artifact retrieved from the demon world the knights had cleansed. Its pages were blank to the untrained eye, but to psychers it screamed in endless prayer. A scripture with no author, and yet a presence that read them in return. "We sealed it within 10 wards of sanctity," she said. "No human hand has touched it since." The old Inquisitor's mechanical lips curved faintly. "Then, perhaps, it is not human anymore." In the catacombs beneath Titan, Brother Arctan awoke to the sound of whispers. His cell was cold, his armor stacked neatly beside the cot, each piece carved with wards against the warp. But the voices came not from the outside. They came from within. "You have seen the truth," they murmured. "You know the lie they serve." He pressed his hands against his temples. "Be silent," he hissed, but the whisper only deepened. Soft, compassionate, familiar. "You fought the demon, and won. But what if the demon never left? What if it wears your face now?" Arctan fell to his knees, trembling. For a moment he saw his reflection in the polished wall, eyes glowing not silver, but crimson. Then the vision faded. Sweat gathered beneath his skin. He recited the Canticle of Purity until dawn. Days later, Titan trembled. It began as a low hum in the fortress core, machine spirits waking from long slumber. The wards that had protected the moon for millennia began to flicker, as if rejecting their own purpose. In the chapel of St. Sigillite, statues cracked from crown to base, releasing a faint, unholy mist. Inquisitor Valen arrived too late. The relic was gone. The vault had been breached from the inside. Panic was a sin. But even on Titan, fear now walked freely. The knights scoured the citadel in silence, their footsteps echoing like distant thunder. Psychic storms rippled through the air, distorting vision and thought alike. In the training halls, initiates found themselves weeping for reasons they could not name. Brother Captain Ephriel led his men deeper into the sanctum, toward the Hall of Echoes, the psychic core of Titan itself. He could feel it calling him, the same voice that had whispered through the warp, "Return to me." At the threshold, he paused. Behind him, his brothers waited. Ahead, the light pulsed like a living heart. "Forgive me," he murmured, and stepped inside. In the high conclave, alarms blared. Drago's voice thundered through the vox. "Seal the lower levels. Ephriel has gone rogue." But it was too late. The Hall of Echoes erupted. Silver light burst from its gates, a psychic detonation that shattered the barriers between thought and flesh. Knights fell to their knees, their minds flooded with visions of the Emperor not as savior, but as something vast and silent, his golden throne dripping with the blood of 10,000 worlds. In that blinding instant, the truth pressed upon them. Their purity had not protected them. It had prepared them to be vessels. When the light faded, the hall was empty. Only the relic remained, hovering in the air, its pages open. The words upon it no longer whispered, they commanded. Drago stood before it, his armor scorched, his psychic wards flickering. He could feel the presence within the tome, a mind vast, ancient, and eerily familiar. "Who are you?" he demanded. The answer came not in words, but in sensation, a flood of memory, the founding of Titan, the secret rites of Malkador, the creation of the Grey Knights, not as protectors, but as seals, not warriors, but locks. And now one had opened. Velen entered moments later. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "My lord," she breathed, "it's spreading, across the Imperium, psychic interference in every astropathic channel, something awake." Drago turned to her, voice cold as the void. "Then it has begun." "What has?" she asked. "The Emperor's silence," he said, "and the reason the warp has been waiting for us." Outside, Titan's sky tore open. A rift, vast and shimmering, bled light into the darkness. The stars themselves recoiled. From within the wound came whispers, millions of voices chanting a name that no living man had heard in 10,000 years. On the fortress walls, the knights knelt in prayer, their faith trembling, because for the first time in their history, they could feel something watching them from within their own souls, a presence older than chaos, purer than the Emperor, and infinitely more dangerous. As the moon quaked, the relic turned one final page, blank, save for a single line that burned itself into the air like fire. "Purity is not salvation. It is the doorway." Then the light swallowed Titan whole. When the light of the Emperor flickers, shadows do not wait. They remember. The explosion of Titan's sky echoed through the void like a dying hymn. The rift spread, veins of light crawling across the moon's surface as if reality itself were trying to escape. Across the Imperium, astropaths screamed in unison, their minds flooded by impossible visions. Silver fortresses burning, knights praying in reverse, the Emperor's golden visage cracking like stone. In that moment, every soul that had ever whispered his name felt it, a pause, a hesitation in the divine. In the catacombs beneath what remained of Titan, Inquisitor Velen awoke amid rubble and ash. The relic was gone. Only faint trails of psychic residue remained, twisting in the air like smoke from an invisible flame. Her armor was shattered, her body numb. But her mind burned with clarity. She remembered the last words before the explosion, the scripture written not on the tome, but into her soul. Purity is the doorway, and she understood, in some distant, horrifying way, that something had stepped through. In the distant Segmentum Solar, aboard the cathedral ship Eternal Benediction, the high ecclesiarch addressed his congregation of 1,000,000 voices. They prayed for Titan, for the Emperor's will, for deliverance. But even as they spoke, the holy light that illuminated the nave dimmed. The stained glass that once shone with his image now bled crimson, forming eyes that watched. The faithful continued chanting, their devotion trembling, while the priests hid their terror behind incense and flame. Then a sound, a low hum, soft as breath, rolled through the cathedral. The Emperor's sigil carved into the altar began to distort, reshaping itself into a new symbol, the same runic shape that had burned into Titan's surface before it was consumed. The congregation fell silent, and then they began to scream. War erupted like infection. On Cadia's ruins, Imperial regiments once thought extinct began broadcasting distress calls in dead languages. On Terra, the Astronomican flared white, then dimmed to a pulse, a heartbeat that faltered. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared a galaxy-wide machine rite of recalibration. Though their true fear was heretical, the Emperor's light no longer guided the warp. The navigators drifted blind, their third eyes bleeding black. Yet, amid the panic, voices rose, whispers of revelation, that the Emperor was not fading, but changing, that the rift on Titan was not an ending, but an awakening. Faith fractured. Where once there had been unity in worship, there was now division in meaning. The ecclesiarchy burned heretics at dawn, only to become heretics by dusk. Pilgrims marched to Terra in chains, proclaiming the coming of a new purity, born not of gold, but silver. And everywhere in dreams people saw them, figures of light in silver armor, neither alive nor dead, watching from the edge of consciousness. Brother Arctan wandered the ruins of Titan. He did not remember surviving, but he lived. His armor was half melted, his psychic wards broken, yet the whispers within him were gone, replaced by stillness, the absence of the warp's breath. When he reached the edge of the crater that had once been the Hall of Echoes, he saw the impossible. Flowers. Tiny, glowing, silver flowers growing from blackened stone. He touched one, and visions burst behind his eyes. Worlds cleansed by light, demons weeping as they burned, mortals singing hymns that no tongue could shape. But within that beauty was dread, because at the center of each flower was an eye, and it was awake. Inquisitor Valen's ship drifted through the debris field above Saturn. She had sealed herself in the sanctum, surrounded by the dying glow of purity wards that no longer answered her call. Every transmission from Terra had ceased. The last message had come from Lord Inquisitor Carthon himself. Do not trust what wears his light. She replayed the recording until the machine spirit within the Vox bled static. Outside her viewport, fragments of Titan's moon glimmered like broken mirrors. For a brief moment, she saw movement. A shadow walking across the surface of nothing, its outline vaguely human, its eyes burning blue. Then it was gone. She opened her palm. The relic shard she had recovered pulsed faintly, alive. She should have destroyed it. Instead, she listened, and for the first time, she heard not a whisper, but a heartbeat. Her own, echoed back from something vast, patient and terribly familiar. The Grey Knights were not gone. From the warp's edge they returned. Thousands of them, their armor cracked and glowing from within, their purity seals turned to molten brands. They emerged from tiers in space, wordless and unified, forming ranks in silence. When they moved, the air trembled. When they spoke, worlds broke. The Imperium hailed them as saviors at first, but wherever they landed, death followed. Clean, bright, final. Planets declared miracles, then vanished from all record. The Knights' purpose had shifted. They no longer purged the demonic. They absorbed it. The warp recoiled from them, yet reality twisted in their wake. For every world they cleansed, 1,000 prayers went unanswered. Drago led them, but Drago was not as he once was. His voice carried through the galaxy like a divine decree. The Emperor sleeps. We are his dream." Those who heard it felt blessed. Then their hearts stopped. Among the ruins of Terra's outer sanctums, a lone missionary named Aran continued to preach beneath the collapsing statues of saints. His congregation was gone, devoured by war and plague, but his voice remained steady. "The Emperor endures," he whispered to the wind. "Even in silence, he speaks." A child, barely 10, approached him, thin, hollow-eyed, holding a fragment of silver armor. "He spoke to me," the child said. "He said he's not dying. He's waking up." Iran smiled weakly. "Dreams of the Emperor are not meant for mortals, child." The boy tilted his head. "Then why can you hear him, too?" Iran froze. He hadn't realized his lips were moving, not in prayer, but in repetition. The same phrase the boy had uttered, word for word. And when he looked into the boy's eyes, he saw his own reflection, burning silver. Faith became a contagion. Those who believed the Emperor was awakening began to change. Their skin shimmered faintly in light. Their voices harmonized when they prayed. They called themselves the Sanctified. The ecclesiarchy denounced them as blasphemers, but every attempt to purge them failed. Their blood turned fire into water, their flesh regrew in moments, and every sanctified claimed to dream of the same figure, a knight of silver light, calling them to rejoin the source. The warp grew still around their worlds, silent and cold. Demons fled from their presence, howling in terror. And yet the stars themselves began to die. Velen watched the spread from orbit. Her records showed the pattern clearly. Each outbreak of sanctified faith began where the Grey Knights had walked. She pieced together the fragments, the warp echoes, the psychic residue. The realization hit her with the weight of a dying god. The Grey Knights had not resisted corruption. They had become it. A new kind, not of chaos, but of absolute order. A contagion of purity. They had banished the warp, but in doing so, they had torn the soul from the galaxy. Faith without chaos. Light without shadow. A universe sterilized by sanctity. On holy Terra, the Adeptus Custodes gathered in the throne hall. The golden throne still burned, its mechanisms groaning under the strain of eternity. But the Emperor's radiance was different, softer, warmer. The Custodes felt peace for the first time in their existence, and it terrified them. Then came the sound. Footsteps, heavy, purposeful. From the hall's distant gate a figure emerged, clad in silver armor so radiant it dimmed the light of the throne itself. The Custodes raised their spears. The figure raised no weapon, only a hand. Drago's voice echoed through the hall. "Your vigil is over." One custodian stepped forward. "You blaspheme. None may approach the master of mankind." Drago smiled, a gesture devoid of malice, filled with sorrow. He no longer needs guardians. He needs silence. As the Custodes advanced, they felt their strength drain, their golden armor turning dull. One by one, they fell to their knees, not in defeat, but in revelation. Drago walked past them toward the throne. The Emperor's eyes, sealed for 10,000 years, opened, but what looked back was not salvation. Across the galaxy, every sanctified fell to their knees simultaneously, their voices merging into a single, perfect tone, a frequency that shattered comms, burned psychers alive, and silenced demons mid-scream. It was the sound of unity beyond comprehension. The warp began to collapse inward, devouring itself in radiant stillness. Inquisitor Velen felt it even from light years away, the stilling of reality, the end of conflict, the drowning peace of absolute control. She tried to pray, but no words came, only calm. The shard in her hand pulsed once, then dissolved into her skin. She saw visions of Drago standing before the throne, the Emperor's light merging with his, their forms indistinguishable, and behind them a shape vast and unseen, stretching through the fabric of creation. Purity is not salvation. It is the doorway. And through that doorway, something stepped, not from the warp, but from within humanity itself. Brother Arctan stood at the edge of what was once the crater of Titan. The flowers had grown tall, forming a forest of silver that shimmered under a sky with no stars. He removed his helm, letting the silence seep into him. It was beautiful, this quiet, the absence of pain, of fear, of thought. Then he realized it was not silence. It was a voice, every prayer, every soul, merged into one consciousness. He felt himself dissolving, his individuality fading into the radiance. He smiled. "We are one." His armor fell empty to the ground. In the end, the galaxy did not burn. It simply stopped. Wars ceased. The warp died. The stars dimmed to silver embers. And across the infinite dark a single thought resonated. Gentle, perfect, eternal. The Emperor endures, but he is no longer ours. And in the void that once held chaos, something vast stirred awake. Not God, not demon, humanity itself, purified, ascended, and utterly unrecognizable. The age of faith had ended. The age of silence had begun. The sky above Titan burned without flame, a psychic storm wreathing the fortress world in whispers of madness. The air itself shimmered with the aftertaste of sorcery long banished, and beneath the silver bastions of the Grey Knights, the librarians gathered in silence, heads bowed, their thoughts echoing through the warp like prayers spoken into a hurricane. They could feel it, the change, a disturbance so profound it made even their consecrated minds falter. Something ancient had awakened, not in the eye of terror, but within the Imperium itself. On the bridge of the battle barge Castellan's Vow, Chapter Master Kaldor Drago stood motionless before the hololith display. Dozens of Imperial worlds flickered red, not from enemy assault, but from sanctioned exterminatus orders. Whole planets burned to protect secrets no mortal would ever learn. He felt the tremor of doubt crawl beneath his armor, like a wound festering beneath ceramite. To serve the Emperor was to never question. But to never question was to be blind. And blindness in this age was heresy in disguise. In the lower decks, men prayed as they died. Not in battle, but by command. The ship's astropaths had been ordered purged after one began whispering the Emperor's name backward in her sleep. The Inquisitor aboard, a gaunt figure of pallid devotion, had decreed it necessary. No one resisted, no one mourned. In the Imperium, obedience was sanctity, and sanctity, a form of death. On Cadriel IV, an Imperial shrine world once gleaming with gold, silence reigned. The Grey Knights arrived not as saviors but as executioners. A relic had been uncovered, a statue weeping blood that burned through the marble floor. The ecclesiarchy called it a miracle. The Ordo Malleus called it corruption, and the Grey Knights, purest of the Emperor's sons, burned the cathedral to ash. The faithful screamed the Emperor's name until their lungs melted, and still the knights did not speak. Faith had become fire. In the ruins of that world, a lone sister of battle knelt amid the smoldering remains. Her armor was cracked, her faith unbroken. She whispered prayers not for salvation, but for understanding, for why the Emperor's own guardians would destroy his house. Her vox crackled with distant transmissions, fragments of battles across the segmentum, 1,000 heresies, all bearing the same name, purity. Somewhere in the hidden vaults of Titan, the librarians gathered around a psychic sigil etched in silver blood. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, sentient. One of them, Brother Archivist Solas, dared to speak. "What if," he began, his voice trembling through the collective mind link, "the corruption is not coming from beyond the stars, but from within the light we worship?" The chamber quaked. Several psychers bled from their eyes. None answered. None could. On Terra, deep beneath the golden throne, The Mechanicus Adepts recorded an anomaly in the Astronomican, a fluctuation shaped like a human face. The signal pulsed once every 7 seconds, a rhythm that mirrored a heartbeat but inverted, as if something on the other side was alive, aware, and calling back. The Custodes dismissed it. The Ecclesiarchy denied it. But in the quiet, the Grey Knights felt it, and they knew the Emperor's light had begun to flicker. In the void, Drago dreamed. He saw the warp open like a wound, spilling not demons but memories. He walked through them. The siege of Terra, the cries of fallen Primarchs, the laughter of gods. But in every vision, one truth remained. The Grey Knights were born not to save humanity, but to destroy it should faith falter. He awoke in his chamber, hands trembling, the silver sigils on his armor burning like chains. "To protect the Emperor's truth," he whispered, "we may one day have to erase his name." On the world of Jurelia, Imperial guardsmen faced horrors without names. Not demons, not heretics, but their own kin. Civilians transformed by psychic radiation from the Astronomican's failing beam. They prayed for aid, and aid came, in silver. The Grey Knights descended like meteors, silent, perfect, merciless. Within hours, the planet was purged, and as their Thunderhawks departed, the surviving soldiers looked upon the burning continents and realized salvation had come too late, and cost too much. High above, in the orbiting inquisitorial frigate Sable Truth, a council convened. 12 inquisitors, 1 knight commander, 1 Mechanicus Magos, and 1 being whose face remained hidden behind a mirrored mask. "The Emperor's light," the masked figure spoke, voice neither male nor female, "is not fading. It is being consumed." The others recoiled. To say such words was to invite execution, but the truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Something was feeding upon humanity's faith. In the depths of Titan, the librarians continued their forbidden communion. They sought the origin of the psychic storm, but found only reflections. Echoes of their own prayers twisted back at them. The sigil in the vault began to pulse faster, resonating with the warp storms across the galaxy. One of the younger psychers, his mind cracking, screamed that he could hear it whispering. "It speaks," he cried. "It knows our names." The others silenced him, but not before the word demon host burned itself into the minds of all present. As war spread, the ecclesiarchy fractured. Some priests preached that the Grey Knights were angels sent to cleanse the impure. Others whispered they were the Emperor's final weapon, meant not to save humanity, but to end it when it strayed too far. Across hive worlds and shrine cities, statues of the Emperor began to weep not blood but black ichor, and pilgrims took it as both a miracle and a warning. Faith became a battlefield more treacherous than any war zone. Aboard Castellan's Vow, Drago stood before the reliquary of Saint Malchior, its glass cracked from battle. He placed his gauntlet upon it and felt something pulse beneath, a heartbeat not his own. The saint's corpse was supposed to be silent, yet beneath the shroud, lips moved. "Do you know what you serve?" the dead man whispered. Drago staggered back, heart hammering. "Only the Emperor," he gasped. But even as he said it, he no longer believed it. Across the segmentum solar, imperial worlds began receiving conflicting orders. Some called for worship, others for silence, some for extermination. Faith itself had become fragmented, rewritten by unseen hands, and the Grey Knights found themselves drawn to a single destination, the moon world of Iridion, where it was said a fragment of the Emperor's psychic essence had been sealed. The Ordo Malleus declared it off-limits. The Knights ignored them. When they arrived, Iridion was not barren. It was alive, a labyrinth of silver towers grown from bone, each humming with prayers in reverse. As they descended, the air itself resisted them. Gravity bent. Voices sang from the walls. They reached the core and found not a relic, but a being, radiant and wrong. A mirror image of the Emperor, eyes burning white, smiling with sorrow. "You seek purity," it said, "yet you carry my sin." The psychic backlash tore through space. Entire fleets went silent. The Astronomican faltered again, its beam flickering like a dying sun. And across the galaxy, billions of faithful felt a single, unified terror, as if the Emperor himself had turned his gaze away. The Grey Knights fell to their knees, caught between revelation and blasphemy. As silence reclaimed Iridion, Drago stood alone before the being's fading light. His voice was barely a whisper. "If you are not him," he said, "then who have we served?" The being smiled as it dissolved into dust. "The echo," it said, "not the voice." The storm that followed was not of fire nor steel, but of faith breaking apart. Titans fell silent. Cathedrals burned from within, and in the deep vaults of Titan, the silver sigil cracked open like an egg, releasing light that screamed. Somewhere, across the void, a new voice began to speak through the Astronomican. It was not the Emperor, and yet every soul in the Imperium heard it and wept. For the first time in 10,000 years, humanity realized the light they followed may not have been his at all, and as the Grey Knights gathered beneath a darkened sky, their halos flickering, their purity trembling, Drago whispered the words no one dared repeat. "We are not the Emperor's shield. We are his shadow." Then the stars began to go out one by one. The galaxy held its breath. Silence, vast and terrible, swallowed the stars that once burned in devotion. The Astronomican's light flickered like a candle dying in a cathedral of corpses. Across a million worlds, prayers faltered mid-verse. The faithful looked skyward and saw nothing. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium was blind, and the Grey Knights, the purest of his sons, were alone. On Titan, the fortress monastery trembled beneath psychic storms unseen since the Great Heresy. Lightning split the sanctum sky, silver arcs dancing across the marble towers etched with the Emperor's sigils. Librarians screamed in unison as their minds shattered under the weight of the truth. The echo had become the voice. The Emperor's presence no longer filled the void. Something else did. Something older. Kaldor Drago stood in the Hall of Blades, surrounded by the statues of heroes long gone. Names carved into stone. Each a life given in faith. He ran a gauntleted hand across the inscriptions, whispering oaths that now felt hollow. The statues seemed to watch him, accusing, silent, eternal. Behind him, Brother Archivist Solace approached, his psychic hood sparking with uncontrolled energy. "He is gone," Solace said softly. "The light is gone." Drago did not turn. "Then we are the last lie left to guard it." A tremor ran through Titan's crust. Deep within the catacombs, the silver sigil that had cracked now pulsed violently, flooding the tunnels with blinding radiance. Tech Marines tried to contain it, chanting machine prayers through Vox distortion, but their flesh began to liquefy under the psychic pressure. The walls bled molten steel, and from the fissure rose a shape, not demon, not divine, something born of mankind's faith made flesh. It spoke with 1,000 voices, each one a prayer, each one twisted. "You built your faith upon an echo," it murmured. "Now the echo becomes the storm." Above, in orbit, the Inquisition's fleets turned their weapons toward Titan. Planetary exterminatus was declared within minutes. The order came from Terra, or what remained of its command. The Ordo Malleus deemed Titan corrupted beyond redemption. They would cleanse it, even if it meant erasing the Emperor's most secret sons. The first cyclonic torpedoes fell, their descent like tears of burning silver. The bombardment split the fortress open. Knight captains led their brothers through collapsing corridors, bolters blazing, faith their only shield. Against demons, against traitors, against gods, they had fought all, but never against themselves. In the chapel of the first conclave, Brother Halem fell to his knees before a burning altar. "Forgive me, my Emperor," he whispered, "for not knowing who you are." His tears hissed on his armor as fire consumed him. Outside, in the void, the Castellan's vow took position between the Exterminatus fleet and Titan's surface. Drago's command. "No one destroys our home," he growled, the ship's vox filled with the prayers of dying serfs, the hum of failing reactors. Yet they turned their weapons toward their own, Imperial ships, their brothers in faith. The first volley tore through the darkness, a betrayal wrapped in duty. Solus knelt in the psychic chamber, hands raised over the pulsing sigil. His mind stretched through the warp, reaching beyond comprehension. He saw glimpses, worlds burning, saints weeping, the Emperor's withered form upon his throne, and, beneath it, movement. The throne was not a prison, it was a cocoon. "He is not gone," Solus gasped. "He is changing." His last thought burned through the warp like a comet before his body disintegrated into ash. On Terra, the Adeptus Custodes stood in silence before the golden throne. The mechanisms groaned, the machinery screamed. Sparks of blinding energy erupted from beneath the cables that fed the Emperor's corpse. One custodian stepped forward, and in the moment before his atoms vaporized, he saw the Emperor's fingers twitch. Once, then stillness. The air around the throne tasted like blood. The Grey Knights fought as worlds died around them. Iridian burned, Cadriel IV imploded, and the very stars seemed to weep. Demons poured through rifts of raw faith, entities born not of hatred, but of misplaced worship. Each one whispered with the voices of the faithful, promising salvation through surrender. The knights answered with bolter fire and blade, reciting litanies not out of belief, but habit. In the ruins of the Librarium Sanctum, Drago faced the being that had risen from the sigil. It towered above him, radiant and sorrowful. Its form flickered between man and god, angel and corpse. "You were never meant to know," it said. "You were meant to believe." Drago raised his nemesis sword, silver fire burning along its edge. Belief without truth is damnation. He struck, and the being smiled. The blade cut through light and shadow alike. A sound like 1,000 choirs dying at once filled the air. The psychic backlash tore Titan's atmosphere apart, sending fragments of silver rock spiraling into space. From the fissure erupted a storm of memory. Every prayer ever spoken by mankind. They rained across the galaxy, each one a spark. Some ignited faith anew, others ignited madness. In that moment, Drago understood. The Emperor's power had never been divine. It was humanity's belief that made him a god. Every prayer, every martyr, every child born under his name, they were the source. And now that belief was splintered. The Imperium's god was not dying. Humanity's faith was. And without it, he would fade into the dark forever. The Castellan's vow broke apart under enemy fire, its decks consumed by holy flame. Crewmen screamed hymns as void rushed in. Drago stood upon the command bridge, armor cracked, blood seeping from his eyes. He turned toward Titan's burning horizon, whispered one final oath, and drove his sword into the deck. The warp answered. A blinding surge enveloped everything. Ships, planets, prayers. Reality folded upon itself. For a heartbeat, the Imperium ceased to exist. Then, silence. When the light faded, Titan was gone. Not destroyed, gone. In its place hung a tier in space, shimmering like glass, through which faint whispers could be heard. Some said they were the voices of the Grey Knights, still fighting in the warp. Others said they had ascended, guardians of faith itself, neither alive nor dead. Across the Imperium, the aftermath was felt like a wound. The Astronomican flickered weakly, then steadied, dimmer than before. The Inquisition declared Titan's loss a necessary sacrifice. Official records were erased. The Grey Knights became legend, or myth. Only a few remembered, and fewer still believed. On Terra, the Emperor's eyes opened for the briefest instant. Not with light, but with sorrow. The throne pulsed once. A breath escaped lips that had been silent for millennia. "My sons," a voice whispered across the warp, "forgive me." Then darkness reclaimed him. Somewhere in the void, among shattered worlds and drifting relics, a single nemesis blade floated, its edge glowing faintly, as if remembering the hand that wielded it. In its reflection, stars began to move again, slow and uncertain, as if guided by unseen purpose. And in that fragile silence, a truth settled across the galaxy like dust after the storm. The Emperor was not a god because he demanded it. He was a god because humanity needed him to be. And now, as that need wavered, something else stirred. Not divine, not damned, but human. The Grey Knights had vanished, defending an empire that no longer believed in itself. Yet their echo remained, not in the prayers of the living, but in the unspoken dread of what would come next. As the last of the warp storms faded, and the stars blinked back into view, one could almost hear it. Faint, distant, eternal. The sound of armored footsteps walking somewhere beyond reality. Marching still, for faith, for humanity, for the echo of a god who had forgotten his name. In the cold afterlight of apocalypse, the galaxy turned slowly, wounded and quiet. Stars drifted like embers in the dark, and the screams of a dying age faded into the endless void. The Imperium endured, but only in the way that tombs endure. Whole sectors lay in silence, their worlds reduced to ash and static. The Emperor's light still flickered above Terra, a dim beacon trembling against the vastness, as if it too feared the dark it once commanded. And somewhere beyond the veil of reason, the Grey Knights were gone, not dead, not living, but absorbed into the quiet machinery of myth. Among the ruins of Cadriel IV, a single survivor walked through the charred bones of what was once a cathedral. The ash fell like snow, soft, unending. The figure, a robed scribe of the Remembrancer's order, moved with reverence, carrying a cracked data slate close to his chest. Each step echoed through the hollow nave, where the statues of saints had melted into twisted silhouettes. He paused before the altar, its gold blackened, its icons erased, and whispered to no one. They said the Emperor was eternal. The words vanished into the cold air. No one answered. He knelt to brush away the dust covering the marble floor. Beneath, faint lines of inscription emerged, names upon names upon names. Grey Knights, martyrs, inquisitors, faithful and damned. The letters were scarred by fire, but one phrase remained untouched. "We are the Emperor's silence." The Remembrancer's breath caught. He had read that line before, deep within the archives of Titan's lost history. It was the last recorded message sent before the fortress vanished. A confession, a prayer, a warning. He looked skyward. The heavens were fractured. A great wound still shimmered where Titan had once orbited, a tear in the fabric of reality, faintly luminous, pulsing like a heart that refused to die. Some called it the ghost scar. Pilgrims claimed to hear voices there when the void winds rose. Others swore the light within it formed shapes, towering forms, silver-clad, kneeling in eternal vigil. But the Inquisition forbade anyone to speak of it. To them, Titan had never existed. The Grey Knights had never been. And yet, the echo endured. Across the Imperium, new creeds emerged. Priests whispered that the Emperor had entered a deeper sleep. Not death, but a transformation beyond mortal comprehension. The ecclesiarchy declared this heresy, yet their own sermons faltered. The faith of mankind no longer roared. It murmured. The great cathedrals of Terra stood half empty. their choirs reduced to hushed lamentations. And still the void hummed with an unseen presence, like breath drawn between prayers. In the Schola archives, ancient texts began to rewrite themselves. Machine spirits whispered liturgies not found in any canon. The light was not his, they murmured in binary hymns, it was ours. Servitors recited forgotten verses until their vocal cords bled oil. Astropaths dreamed of silver figures walking across the stars, leaving trails of light behind them. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared these anomalies statistical aberrations, but even their logic faltered when sacred databanks began recording psalms they had never stored. Far beyond Terra, on a nameless frontier world where faith was a luxury and survival the only creed, a group of settlers built a shrine from scavenged metal. It bore no symbols of the Aquila, no sigils of the ecclesiarchy, only a blade, half buried in stone, a relic that glowed faintly under starlight. They did not know what it was or whose hand had wielded it. Yet when storms raged, the lightning avoided the shrine, and the settlers spoke of dreams filled with calm, silver light. In their language they called it the Guardian's Rest. Years passed, then centuries. The Imperium rebuilt, as it always had, on bones, on faith, on lies too sacred to question. The scars of the Grey Knight's final act became myths retold by candlelight. Children heard tales of silver warriors who walked into the void to save humanity from itself. Some said they were angels, others executioners. None knew the truth, and perhaps that was mercy. The Remembrancer's final entry, found centuries later, spoke of his last vision before the scarred sky. "I saw them," he wrote, "kneeling before a light that was not the Emperor's. It was the light of mankind, fragile, trembling, but alive, and in their silence I heard peace." His words became the final verse in a book no one dared to publish. The Inquisition burned his body, but his ashes scattered upon the same winds that carried his story into eternity. And somewhere, beyond the edge of the Astronomican's reach, within the rift where Titan once stood, something stirred. It was not divine. It was not profane. It was the memory of devotion, sharpened into purpose. A single gleam of silver drifted through the void. A figure cloaked in light, its armor cracked but unyielding. The sword in its hand burned not with psychic fire, but with quiet resolve. As it passed through the remnants of dead stars, others joined it. Shadows of warriors, thousands of them, their march soundless yet vast. They moved not toward war, but toward the heart of humanity's fading light. Guardians, still, but no longer of gods, only of what remained human. On Terra, the Emperor's heart beat once, just once. A pulse that rippled through time and space, felt by no machine, recorded by no mind. Yet, across the Imperium, a moment of stillness fell. Soldiers paused mid-battle. Children stopped crying. In that single heartbeat, all of humanity shared the same dream, of standing in the light of 1,000 burning stars, hearing the sound of armor moving through the void, and feeling for the first time in millennia that they were not alone. The wound in the sky closed slowly. The last traces of the warp storm faded into silence, and the stars, the ancient, patient stars, began to shine again. Not brighter, but steadier. As if a great weight had lifted from them. As if the galaxy itself exhaled after an age of holding its breath. The Remembrancers who came after called this age the Quiet Dawn. They chronicled it not in triumph, but in humility. They wrote of wars without victors, gods without answers, and men who chose to fight even when their faith had died. They wrote of silence, not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of truth too vast to speak. And they ended their histories with a single question, carved into the stone walls of the Imperial archives. If faith made gods, what will we make now when faith is gone? In the final light of that question, the galaxy seemed infinite. A cathedral without walls, filled with echoes of prayers once spoken and never forgotten. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of empires and eternity, the Grey Knights marched still, not toward victory, but toward remembrance. Their steps were steady, their purpose unbroken, the silver guardians of a faith that no longer needed gods. If you felt the silence, if you walked through the ashes of their truth, if the echo of their vow reached you, like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments tell me, what do you believe remains when even the divine has fallen silent?